ما شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وآله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، رمضان مبارك everybody. عام وأنتم بخير. It's such a pleasure to be back. MICA, not as pleasure. Can you hear me and see me clearly? You can just type that. Can you hear me and see me clearly?
Yes, from my own
Yes, I can see you clearly.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, go on. It's such a pleasure to be back with MICA. Not as pleasurable as being there in Nigeria. Fantastic experiences, fantastic people that I got to see there. Subhanallah. Oh, mashallah. I see Sheikh Nuruddin, Sister Maryam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I see other mashallah, beloved brothers and sisters. This Zoom society is a different world. Oh, mashallah. Mashallah. Assalamu alaikum. I'm using it. How many people I can see, but so a greeting to all of you, inshallah, and those whom I got to know in Nigeria. Assalamu alaikum. Allah bless you all. It's great to get in touch. And those whom I didn't get to know, assalamu alaikum, get to know you. The theme that I gave to my brothers and sisters has to do with the Quran. And I guess a point of organization, if people online, if they can just push the mute button, I guess the mute button would help. Because
I used to DJ back in the day. It's the old school way.
This is everybody that is there.
But no, but I haven't started the lecture.
Yeah, if we can all press the mute button. And then when I finish talking, I'll mute myself, and then so we can hear each other, inshallah.
Okay.
Put everybody else on silent. If you can put everybody else on silent, please.
I don't started, so I need to get on that. Don't go and press anything more.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah. So the title of this discussion, I'll speak for less than half the time, then allow inshallah discussion. It's a very important topic. And subhanallah, it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have this lockdown these days in order to increase our time with the Quran. The title that I chose for this is an ayah that is repeated twice in the same words and repeated many times in the same meaning, which is أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Don't they reflect upon the Quran? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one ayah, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Don't they reflect upon the Quran, or do they have locks on their hearts? And the other ayah says أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it has come from any source other than Allah, they would have found contradictions or differences or discrepancies in it. So in other words, there is an ayah that talks about the reflection on the Quran and the heart, and the other ayah talks about the reflection of the Quran and the mind. So if you reflect on the Quran, you will not find any discrepancy. You will find the coherent way of life that the Quran is asking us to follow, and you will find the proofs and the arguments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending us.
Hello.
That is absolutely
Hello,
coherent.
Yeah, everybody can hear what you are saying. You have to mute everybody. Everybody is hearing you. Then, which account are you using? Hello? Hello, Quadri.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, Assalamu alaikum. Please, I'll be muting everyone right now, and I'll only leave Sheikh unmuted. Okay, so please just kindly bear with us while I mute everyone.
Sure.
Hello?
Yes. Mo ń gbọ́ yín, mo ń gbọ́ yín. Rántí mute screen ni mo ti mute everybody. So ẹ jẹ́ n lọ mute ti MICA. Only tí mo create. Mi create account kankan. Èyí tí mo fi retrieve bóyá Yahoo lẹ́nu. Oh, mo ń bọ̀ jẹ́ sáré sọ̀tì kìíní kí lè mute everybody ẹ jọ̀ọ́.
Just type
If we can just mute, okay, inshallah. So the two verses we're talking about, the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't they reflect upon the Quran so they can see its coherence and its logic and its consistency. And the other verse, he said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't they reflect upon the Quran, or do they have locks on their hearts? So basically, when you reflect upon the Quran, you will open those two things. You will open your mind and open your heart. And during these circumstances, as I was saying, for those who were saying they couldn't hear at the beginning, we are in a time that it's very important to have companions. Alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give everybody in their own homes a good companionship with families. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide everybody to, peaceful coexistence with families and so forth. But the companionship that we could seek to be closest to our hearts and our minds is the companionship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for sure. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala sent that book in order for us to have this companionship. And if we reflect upon the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that our heart will be in coherence with His message, and our mind will be in coherence with His message. The Quran is a highly untapped source of Islamic knowledge. And I mean, I'm saying this as somebody who works in the area of Islamic thought and Islamic law, been teaching that for decades. I could tell you that we as Muslims are so far from the Islam that the Quran defines. And the more people get further from the Quran, the more they get further from what Islam is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent. And I'm talking about scholars and non-scholars, even people who study Sharia or study Hadith or Tafsir and so on. They rarely tap this source for knowledge. It's true that the knowledge of the Quran is the basis of fiqh and so on. But the Quran is not only about fiqh in the historical sense of asking a question of whether something is halal or haram, and therefore you get an answer. The Quran is a worldview, is something that is pre-fiqh. Fiqh is very important, and everything is either halal or haram or wajib and so forth. It's true. But before that, how do you see the world? How do you imagine things? How do you define things? The definition of the world, what you call in the academic language perhaps, the conceptual framework of the world. How do you define concepts? How do you define Islam? Let's take the basic question. The Quran tells us that Islam is the religion of every prophet, from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Islam is not just something that Muhammad wrote sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then his companions took on, and then the Khilafah, and then the kingdoms after the Khilafah, and then you read the Islamic history and you read the Islamic sources, and this is Islam for us. The Quran tells us that Islam is the religion of Jesus sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, his followers, some of them followed him, which is the minority, followed him as a prophet, and They did not change any of their books and so forth. And some of his followers deviated. Musa sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet of Islam. Nuh is a prophet of Islam, and so forth. So Islam started with the beginning of humanity. In fact, Islam started before that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that jinn are kuffar and Muslimin. وَأَنَّا مِنَّا الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَمِنَّا الْقَاسِطُونَ. We have Muslims and we have disbelievers or unjust people to themselves, the jinn. And the jinn were created before Adam. So even before us, Homo sapiens, whatever has lived on earth before, had known Islam versus non-Islam. Allah is saying in the Quran. And therefore, that is a different existence for a Muslim, and a different definition of history, and a different way of looking at life. When you look at Islam this way, when you read the Quran and you look for ilm is knowledge in the Quran. Ilm in the Quran is not just fiqh, and it's not just hadith or tafsir, and it's not just quote unquote Islamic studies. Ilm in the Quran is defined in a comprehensive way. So when you look at al-ulama, therefore, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء, the Quran is telling us that al-ulama, or scholars, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is saying this in the context of talking about natural phenomena and mountains and so forth, and the colors of the rocks. And so he's telling us basically that al-alim in Islam is not just a faqih. Al-alim in Islam is somebody whose knowledge takes him or her closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, al-ulama and al-ilm as defined in the Quran is different from al-ilm as we have it in our popular culture. Al-ilm, we could say sometimes science, and therefore we differentiate between scientists and jurists. This is, deen, and this is dunya. And we have kind of a secular approach to Islam by dividing al-ilm into ilm al-dini, the religious sciences, and the dunya sciences, or the worldly sciences, the secular science. That is a secular definition of ilm. I live in the West. That's how people in the West define ilm. Theology versus academia. You want to study theology, you go to a seminary or something. You want to study academic sciences to become a doctor or a lawyer or a historian or a psychologist, you go and study in a secular way. Islam doesn't define ilm like that. And when we read the Quran, it brings us back to the original definition of Islam, the original definition of ilm, the original definition of ibadah. Al-ibadah, we developed something in our culture as Muslims where ibadah is equated to what we call the ibadat or ta'abudiyat. So what is ibadah? Wallahi, I will pray, I will fast, I will do zakah, I'll do hajj, and so on. But ibadah in the Quran is different. Ibadah in the Quran is the objective of creation. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So he created jinn and ins to worship him. And ibadah in that sense is something that you do with everything. Everything in your life and death could be ibadah. قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our life. And that connects with the other concept of ilm that the Quran will teach us. And therefore, every ilm I learn, whether ilm from the dunya or ilm from the deen, according to the secular division, is actually something that is part of my ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every action I do, whether it's in the mosque and giving zakah and hajj and so on, or it's with the family, or it's at work, or in the political life, or the economic life, or whatever it is, as a Muslim, as a believer, I have to do this as part of my ibadah. And therefore, we have here a different definition of Islam. And I mean what I say. When we read the Quran, we have a different definition of Islam from the Islam we are living actually in our popular cultures. But what we did as Muslims is leave the Quran to al-ulama, what we call al-ulama, or the scholars, or basically the jurists. And of course, as somebody who's a jurist, I read the Quran. This is the source of my knowledge for jurisprudence and so on. But this is not what the Quran is for only. This is a small part of it. And because we don't define Islam and ilm and ibadah and so on as is supposed to be defined in the Quran, we let the scholars create some sort of a strata in our society. We have priesthood in Islam, even though we are not supposed to have priesthood in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that priesthood is a bid'ah. You know, the only place in the Quran where the word bid'ah that we argue a lot about is mentioned. وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. Priesthood that they made as an innovation in the religion. Not every innovation, obviously. Innovation in the English word is a tricky word, and English is not my language, but really innovation is not really the word of bid'ah. Bid'ah is a deviation, is a if you wish, a fabrication, something of that sort. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that they fabricated rahbaniyah, or priesthood, where a deen is with the ruhban, you know, with the priests. And if you ask about Islam, you go and ask the scholar who is the priest, and they tell you what Islam is. And Muslims, similar to other religions, I'm shocked sometimes in some interfaith dialogue or Bible studies, or I'm shocked sometimes how Christians and Jews haven't read the Bible. They don't know what the Bible is about, except for the scholars, obviously, that, you know, we deal with. But the average person, you know, they live and die without opening the Bible and reading the Bible. We actually have that in Islam. We have Muslims live and die without reading the Quran once, you know, without knowing what this book is about. Even though our relationship with the Quran, according to the definition of Islam, is a very different relationship. This is what Muhammad left sallallahu alayhi wasallam for us to follow. تركت فيكم ما إن تمسكتم بهما لن تضلوا بعدي أبدا كتاب الله وسنتي, or كتاب الله وعترتي. The hadith that he said sallallahu alayhi wasallam before he left sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, I left two things for you. If you hold tight to them, you will never go astray. The book of Allah and my sunnah and my tradition and my example. And the other narration, the book of Allah and my family, who were, you know, narrating after the Prophet ﷺ, his example and so on. The Quran said, وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْرَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. The Quran is telling the mothers of the believers to narrate what they see from the book of Allah and the hikmah and the wisdom from the Prophet ﷺ. So he left his family with us to narrate, and he said, وَسُنَّتِي, or my example of my tradition, as the narrators said. So these are the two things that he left, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And these two things, to give another additional point here, one of them revolves around the other. The sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam revolves around the Quran. The sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam is not another source of Islam, as we say, you know, technically in the academic world of fiqh and so on. No, it's not a second source. It's the same source, but it is an illustrating source. وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. The Quran is saying that the Prophet ﷺ has received that knowledge so that he could illustrate. He is an illustrator. Aisha, when she was asked about his manners, radiallahu anha, al-Mu'mineen, his wife, she told him, do you read the Quran? The person who asked, he said, yes, I do. She told him he was a Quran walking on earth. So read the Quran and you'll understand Muhammad. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's best source of knowledge is the Quran. The best source of seerah is the Quran. Ibn Hisham is great, and Muhammad ibn Ishaq, and Aban ibn Uthman ibn Affan, and Imta' al-Ismail Maqrizi. All of these are fine. But the best seerah is the Quran. Not all of these, because I mean they, you know, narrations and they contradict each other in some details and so on. The best source of hadith is the Quran, actually. And yes, we have a wealth of hadith that is in addition to the Quranic knowledge. But that hadith that we have should be chapterized and should be classified and should be understood under the Quran, because that is how you understand the hadith. Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, did a great favor to Islam by collecting the hadith. When he chapterized the hadith, he chapterized it according to fiqh, because he started with, Kitab al-Iman and so on, and then the books of fiqh, really. So Salah, Zakah, Talaq, Zawaj, etc. But the best chapterization of the hadith is really under the Quran. So whenever there is an ayah that talks about something and there is a hadith that relates to it, that's how you understand the hadith the best, not the other way around. And then eventually we deviated in some of the scholarship schools, where some scholars had said that you need the Sunnah more than the Quran, and the Quran needs the Sunnah more than the Sunnah needs the Quran, and all of these things. And this is not Quranic, simply. This is not the right perception, because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an illustrator of the Quran, and the narrators narrate by the meaning. Anyway, I mean, even any hadith, Bukhari number 1, Namal A'malu bin Niyat, you will find 6 or 7 narrations, because the narration is by the meaning. Namal A'malu bin Niyat, Imra'atin yatazawwajuha, Imra'atin yankuhuha, etc. Why? Because the narrations are not Quran. The narrations are by the meaning. And every person who has a journey with the books of hadith, every scholar who opens the books of hadith knows that any hadith in the world will have several versions. The same meaning, a word here or there and so on, but that's not Quran. Quran is different. We have several versions in the Quran, but it's just the accent. Malik, Zakkaha, Zakkeha, just accents. And very, very tiny differences between the narrations of the Quran. They are all kind of like language variations of the same thing, but the Quraysh, they don't say the Hamza, so as-sama, not as-sama. Small difference, but the hadith is different. The hadith is narrated by the narrator's perception of what happened. And therefore, how can we put the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in the right place as the source that illustrates the Quran, is by referring to the meanings of the Quran to illustrate the Sunnah. And the Sunnah cannot contradict the Quran. The narration might. Some of the narrations contradict some of the Quran. If we have time, we can give some examples in the discussions. A few of them, even in the authentic books, of course, authentic books are overwhelmingly authentic. But some of them, every commentator of al-Bukhari had differed with al-Bukhari over a few of the narrations, and let alone the other commentators, and so forth. So basically, my brothers and sisters, the point is that reflecting on the Quran is bringing back Islam, the original Islam, to our lives. We have been far from that book and its meanings, and therefore we have been apologizing for the status quo thought that is prevalent in our time, or the status quo institutions, or the status quo culture, versus what the Quran is telling us. And I gave a few examples of the word Islam itself, basic, the word ibadah, the word ilm, and so forth. You go to the Quran pictures Islam in a very different way. Taqwa, taqwa, we think that somebody has taqwa is somebody who is meek, and you sit in the mosque, and they have, whether they are from a Sufi tradition, which is great, but somebody who has taqwa is somebody who is kind of meek. Piety, we translate it as piety, but taqwa is a huge concept in the Quran. The taqwa is something that you attain by fasting and by praying and by doing jihad and by being good to your family and by being good to your parents and by seeing the world and touring the world and discovering it, and by learning knowledge. You attain taqwa through so many means. Taqwa is not piety or and so forth. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to be closer to that book, and to bring our Islam closer to that book, and to bring our understanding of the Sunnah and fiqh closer to that book, because that is the way of success. Al-falah, the Quran calls it al-falah. Hayya al-falah, the success, come to success. This is the success in this life and the afterlife. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all and protect us all in this month and this time. Wa jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Jasser. Please, do we have any questions? You can ask them on the chat.
Okay, I'm not sure I see. Well, I see messages coming up, but if you can read some of the questions, sister.
We don't have any questions so far.
Oh, mashallah. I cannot see everybody here, so if you can moderate, please. If somebody wants to speak, they can just, unmute and pop in.
Okay, Adrat, you can unmute and ask a question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jasser. So good
Oh,
to see
mashallah,
you.
Sister Najat. Are you in Nigeria?
No, I'm in the US. Alhamdulillah.
Oh,
So good to
mashallah.
see you. Alhamdulillah.
Mashallah. Wow, okay. We have an international audience
Thank you
here.
so much. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for listening. May Allah reward you. I
Yeah.
have a question, Dr. Jasser, and I must apologize. I joined in about 5 minutes late, so I missed
No
this. However, I just wanted to, if you could expand on this idea of priesthood in Islam, that this does not exist, because I want to understand that in the context of, for example, some of the tariqas with the murids and things of that nature, which is very prominent. And I think that some people do draw inspiration from their teachers, from their murids, from their sheikhs. But I want you to please expand on understanding and clarifying that, if you can. Thank you.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Well, mashallah, Sister Ajarat was my student. I'm proud of that. Sometime back in the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies, did a master's in Islamic thought with me. So, Jazakallah khair. It's a good question, sister. Well, of course, let's go back to the Quran. The Quranic concept is teachers, examples. Can I have a teacher? Can I have an example? Can I? Of course. But that teacher is not a priest. There is a difference between somebody I am following in order to learn from and somebody I relegate religion to, or delegate my faith to. And I don't think for myself, and I don't act for myself. And that person, as some of the people in the tariqas say, that person would deal with me as they deal with the dead body in the washing room. No, I mean, no. If the sheikh tells me something that is good for my heart, the sheikh says, well, I feel that you need to fast for 10 days. Go fast for 10 days and come back. Of course, then if I follow the sheikh, I follow his examples. But if the sheikh asks me to jump in the fire, as the Prophet ﷺ told his companions, you have a leader, but if the leader asks you to jump in the fire and you jump in it, you'll never come out of it. Therefore, I have to have a mind, even if I am part of a group, whether a Sufi group for education and so on, whether a movement group for a political purpose, it's all good, it's all Islamic. But even in the political group, I have to have my own mind. I cannot cross certain lines in Islam because I am a part of the group. That's the difference between being part of an Islamic group and being part of a political party. A political party, I have to go with the line of my party. But with an Islamic group, I have to object sometimes to what the Islamic group says, which I don't believe in. And I cannot do something just because I'm in the group. It's not a political party. And so forth. Similarly, with teachers, it's different. We ask the teachers, but I'm not sure. I think we delegate too much to the jurists. I receive questions sometimes that are very personal, that people really seriously should make up their minds for, and they should, ask their own consciousness about. Sometimes, like a recent question, I have this argument with my wife. The masjid is, I have to take a car in order to pray in the masjid, but she's telling me, but you can walk to the other masjid in the other direction in some city, I guess in the States where you are in California. So, and Sheikh, what do I do? I said, Akhi, I don't know. This is not a question that you ask somebody who specializes in fiqh. I can, help you with the division of inheritance, some fatwa related to, Allah forbid, divorce or whatever, or something related to the law. But the day-to-day, we need to make our own decisions. And we cannot really go back to jurists as if they are priests. And unfortunately, many jurists like that, or many of our contemporary scholars, not all of them, obviously, they kind of like that. And a different scholar would have told him, Akhi, you have to go to masjid number A versus number B. And then he exercises some authority on the guy. And the guy should take lead of his life and solve the problem with his wife. Or if they cannot solve the problem, which is a common answer I give, you guys don't need a fatwa, you need a counselor. I am not qualified to counsel you guys. I can tell you, how to divide whatever for the kids or custody or, the law issues. But I'm not a counselor. You have a communication problem, find a counselor. You have another medical problem, find a doctor. Sometimes the priesthood strata that we created causes problems because politicians smell power there, and then they start to exploit the bracket of scholars for the sake of power. We suffer from that a lot as scholars in different countries, where politicians really want to use us to exercise power, sometimes in a good way, and sometimes in a manipulative way. But we're not supposed to have power. We're supposed to just be knowledgeable people. And finally, another point, a scholar is not somebody who gets a certificate from somewhere, or it's not about that, or how big his amama is, or how big his beard. It's not about that. A scholar is a knowledgeable person that the ummah believes is a knowledgeable person, and therefore they trust to learn from, to ask questions, and so forth. So a scholar is not really necessarily part of a clan or a church or any of that. We don't have this in Islam. So we need to go back to that model, because that is a more shura model in Islam. The shura of scholarship, that is a much better model than the monopoly and the church style that we have in Islam these days. Allahu Alam. Can you read questions? Because they come and go quickly on my screen. Sorry.
Sure. Next question. I wanted to know Dr. Jasser's opinion on reading the Quran for beginners. It takes a while for them to get used to reading well, and I've heard some ustads say that they have to read with tajweed, otherwise they may be doing wrong. This I find is discouraging for beginners, and they end up not bothering with.
Well, Jazakallah khair. The understanding is more important than tajweed. To understand what you are reading is more important than memorizing it, and more important than reading it with the right sounds and so on. Many of our youth memorize the Quran and they are hafiz, but they are not fahim. They understand nothing about it from the beginning to the end, but they memorize it, an additional copy. That is not the way the Quran is asking us to deal with it. Hence the title of this lecture, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Don't they reflect upon the Quran? Okay, I don't know the Arabic language. Can I read the Quran in my local language or in any other language? Yes, but know that this is not, you have to know, that this is not the Quran. This is a translation or an interpretation of the Quran, because any translation is an interpretation. But it's important, it's good. Read the translation and learn from the translation. These concepts I'm talking about, they are the same across translations. I would also add, let us also try to learn the Arabic language. I know many people think that this is a problem, but I don't think so. We're speaking here in English because it's, I guess, common between attendees of this lecture, most of us would have learned English in addition to their mother tongue. You know, when I came to Canada, I didn't speak English. I learned English to use it. Arabic is easier than English to learn. And it's necessary for those who are resourceful enough, young enough, those who are into the area of Islamic knowledge, to put time in order to learn this language and read the Quran for themselves. Because this is a language, as I'm saying, that defines Islam. Even if you don't know the Arabic language as a language, at least you should know the Arabic concepts. So Salah is Salah, Zakah is Zakah, Hajj is Hajj, Zina is Zina. It's not fornication or adultery or any of these things, because they have different meanings. A masjid is a masjid. It's not a mosque, it's not a temple, it's not a church. It is a masjid. So at least if you cannot learn the whole language, at least your language, your day-to-day language, should have the Quranic concepts, which are in Arabic. But Arabic is not a race. Arabic is not from the Ya'rub who lived in Arabia. No, the Quran talks about Arabic as a lisan, a language and culture. It's not necessarily the Arab people. And therefore, anybody who learns Arabic, as the Prophet ﷺ said, different opinions about the authenticity of the hadith, but the meaning of the hadith is correct. And that, you know, is a big deal, that anybody who learns Arabic is an Arab in that sense, is somebody who learns the Quran. For beginners, I think you should start with understanding for beginners, not reading for beginners. Because reading for beginners will make you read a, ba, ta, but we don't understand anything. Take a beginner's guide, but a beginner's of meanings, not a beginner's of Arabic. Allah.
Please, can we go on mute? Next question. How do we reconcile the ahadith that contradicts the Quran, especially if this contradiction is in the interpretation as opposed to something very clear? I know one answer is to ask, how do I trust my heart, Ya Rab?
I got the question, but I didn't get the last part. Sorry.
The last sentence is, I know one answer is to ask our hearts for the fatwa, but how do I trust my heart, Ya Rab? Should I ask the question again?
Yes, no, Jazakallah khair. Well, how do you know if they bear different interpretations? Well, there are some narrations that are totally against the Quran, and this is easy to reject. You know, scholars in the past have rejected that. A few of them stayed in the authentic collections, but they are clearly against. You know, like the hadith, do not marry a black man, for example, and you know, لا تنكحوا الزنج فإنه خلق مشوه. Do not marry a black man because they are deformed people. I mean, this is obviously something similar to what the colonizers used to say. This is not Muhammad speaking. Obviously, I mean, there are hadith that are silly like that and obvious, that they are inserted into the narrations by hypocrites. And yes, hypocrites did insert some lies into the narrations. That's why Muhammad ﷺ said, if you lie about me, you go to hell, and so forth. Some ahadith, just they need, as you are saying rightly, they need an interpretation in order to put them in the context. I was talking the other day about women and the mosque and so forth. And there is the hadith of Humayd, the Sahabiya, the companions, when the Prophet told her, pray at home, it's better than praying in my mosque. He's not saying this for every place and time. He was telling her that because she had small children and she had the difference with her husband over staying at home with the children versus praying in the mosque. And she was far, Ansariya, Sa'idiyya, Bani Sa'ida are far from Medina. She used to walk for hours to come to the mosque. So the Prophet told her, pray at home, it's better than praying in my mosque. That is not for every place and time. So this hadith contradicts with the Quran. The Quran doesn't differentiate between men and women in that. And hundreds of other hadith do not differentiate between men and women in terms of praying in the mosque, except for Jum'ah. But he told her, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that praying at home is better. So we need to interpret the hadith in a way that brings it in line with the Quran and with the other hadith. Now, if there are different opinions, what do you do? Yes, ask your heart. If there are different opinions, like for example about this issue of women and praying in the mosque, many scholars would tell you, no, women are not supposed to be in the mosque to start with. And this is the whole Hanafi madhab, and like 1/3 of the mosques in this world don't even allow women from the door. Does this make sense? Ask your heart. Is this like Islam? Is it like a religion where the place of worship is only for men? No. Any reasonable, sound-minded, sound-hearted Muslim would tell you that no, not really. It doesn't make sense. لا تأكلوا لحوم البقر فإنها مسمومة. He's saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that supposed narration, do not eat cow meat because it's poisonous, right? Does this make any sense? Well, the Quran is talking about cow meat as a blessing from Allah. How can we take a hadith that says that meat is poisonous? And so forth. You see, ask your heart. Does that make any sense that we do that? And if you are wrong, Allah will forgive you, because then it is a matter of what is called ijtihad. Ijtihad is reasoning, and that is for scholars, yes, but every Muslim is a scholar in their own right. Every Muslim has the ability to think for themselves, depending on how much knowledge they have. If I have that amount of knowledge, I am not supposed to think about issues that I have no knowledge about. وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Do not follow something that you have no knowledge about. Quran is telling us. So if you don't have a knowledge in an area, ask a knowledgeable person. But if you have knowledge as a Muslim, have the courage to judge for yourself, to do your own ijtihad, so that you can pursue life without, always asking and so forth. Allah Alam. Any other questions?
Next question. How do you reconcile practices that have been but are supported in the Quran, example, slavery?
Well, slavery, we have to understand that the Quran came to a society to change it. And that change has to have certain dynamics. Basically, what the Quran did is to take slavery out of its definition to a very different definition, and then allowed us to take the next step as time went on after Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in order to get rid of the rest of it. Like basically, when Islam made the slave a brother or sister of the person who is supposed to be the owner of the slave, and therefore making that like he has to wear what you wear, and he has to eat what you eat, and so forth. That is redefining slavery in a way that makes it really some form of a labor. In addition to what happened with the wars. Towards the end of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were no more enslavement of people from wars. The Khulafa did not enslave anybody. Abu Bakr did not. And Umar said, when do you enslave people who were born free? So I believe that towards the end of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, slavery was what is there, including the freeing of the slaves, and including for the women, that if they bear a child, then they are free, and so forth. And there were no more enslavements of people through the war. I believe that this is what happened historically. And I believe that slavery returned with the change of the Khilafah into a kingdom, with the Bani Umayyah. The children of Umayyah from the Arabs, they canceled the Khilafah, demolished the Khilafah. However, I'm not being diplomatic about saying it. They basically demolished the Khilafah and made an empire out of the Khilafah. the empire had some positive points for sure, but it is no longer the Islamic system. So they returned to slavery, and they relaxed all the rules that we had in Islam that was supposed to de-slave people over the time. And therefore slavery continued because of the kingdom, not because of Islam. So that's what I think had happened. Welcome with follow-up questions if you wish, by the way, if I don't answer a question.
And not the other.
Please.
Sorry? What did you say, Doctor?
I'm just saying welcome with follow-up questions if I don't like, the slavery issue or any other questions.
Oh, okay. So the next question, can you explain more about the hadith being first from the Quran and not the other way around?
Being first?
Yes. Being first from, I'm not sure I understand that either.
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah. Well, because in Islam, we have the source of knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the revelation. It's called al-Wahy. The revelation is the Quran, from al-Fatiha to al-Nas. What you read in that book. This is the message. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the human whom Allah blessed by receiving that message to read it for us and to purify us with his example. His main mission was to convey the Quran to us. And his second mission was to illustrate it in a human form, in a social form, as a father, as a grandfather, as a husband, in the market, in the battlefield, with issues of politics and management and war and peace and water and food and hygiene. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam illustrated the Quran by his example. So the first source is the Quran, and the second source, or the illustration of the first source, is the Sunnah. And I was saying that some scholars say that Sunnah has more importance than the Quran, and that is, in terms of the Islamic faith, is wrong, because the Quran is the source of knowledge, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is illustrating it to us by his example. Why do we insist on this? Because some of the narrations about him, not him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was always coherent with the Quran, but some of the narrations about him is not coherent with the Quran, because the narration or the narrator made a mistake somehow, or understood something that is specific for a particular event and made it a general rule, or entered in the mosque in the middle of the khutbah, so he heard the second half and did not hear the first half, or any of these things that happens sometimes in narrations. So that's why the narrations should be secondary in that sense.
Jazakallah khair. Due to the language of the Quran, most people rely on the Quran to assist in the understanding of the book. How do we relate this if we don't understand the language?
If you don't understand the language, then you should compare the different tafsirs. You should ask as well, but you should compare the different tafsirs. I mean, I'm happy to see websites with like 10 different interpretations in English, translations, and very, different commentaries and so on. Compare, because if there is somebody who made a mistake in a tafsir, is this the question? I understood it was about the tafsir or the translation. So I'm saying if somebody makes a mistake about a tafsir or translation, the others will not make the same mistake. So inshallah, if you read more, you will learn more, inshallah, and be able to correct what mistakes people make in the interpretation or the tafsir or the translation.
What are the rulings to a woman who is menstruating to read the Quran?
Well, there is no evidence that she cannot read the Quran. There is no evidence from the Quran or from the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a long story. Scholars differed. Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam, has a good research on this. If you look up on the internet, I'm sure it's translated to English as well. And he wrote some good research on all the hadith that do not allow, or the opinions anyway, they're not hadith, do not allow women to read the Quran during their periods. And Ibn Taymiyyah concluded that there is no evidence really for a woman in her period or a man in an impure state not to touch the Quran or read the Quran. There is no evidence for that. The evidence that they mention is the ayah that says, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. The Quran is not touched except by the most purified ones. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the book in the heavens, not the book that we have here. Because the book that we have here is supposed to be read by everybody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking the disbelievers to read it. How can they read it if they cannot touch it? How can they learn about, I'm talking about believers and disbelievers, Muslims and non-Muslims, men and women. How can they learn about it if they cannot touch it? That contradicts with what the Quran is saying. So Allah alam. So read the Quran, inshallah. Don't stop during that. During the menses, a woman is not supposed to fast and is not supposed to pray, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had required her to not to fast and not to pray. Why? Because some women insist on fasting or praying if they have that. And many women have an unusual time when they have their menses. So Islam, out of being kind to women, not just gave them the option, but required them not to do these obligations. The Quran is different. There is no script about the Quran and menses anyway. Allah.
Assalamu alaikum. Please kindly advise on these. If I'm constrained for time this Ramadan and I want to interact with the Quran, should I prioritize recitation or reading of the meaning?
I would combine a little bit of recitation, even if you recite from the last chapter, or memorize, if you wish, from the last chapter, a little bit, but give most of your time for the translation and the understanding of the meaning. But not 100% of your time. Any Muslim or Muslimah has to have time with the Quran in terms of recitation, even if you recite Qul Wallahu Ahad or the last surahs. But you have to have your own schedule of recitation. Most of your time, though, if you really want to learn the Quran, is to read the language you understand in terms of the interpretation. Allah.
Other than the Quran, what other 3 books on general teachings of Islam would you recommend to us?
Well, it depends on who you are and what you do in life and what you would like to achieve. I don't know. Really depends on who you are. If you are a person who is somebody who works in medicine or something, then you read things that are different from somebody who works as a counselor, as somebody who's a teacher. There are different books. There are mother books, or what we call seminary books in our Islamic civilization, that address different people according to who they are and what they do in life. Not everybody should study fiqh or could study fiqh. Not everybody could read particular commentaries. So after the Quran and the collections of hadith that are accessible to you, read according to asking people of knowledge, according to who you are. Allah.
Are there any particular English authors and scholars you would recommend us to read from?
English, okay. So in English, well, since I'm talking about the Quran, read the interpretations of the Quran of some scholars that, alhamdulillah, have been translated recently. We have In the Shade of the Quran by Sheikh Sayyid Qutb. It's a contemporary tafsir. I think it's very good, and I have seen the 30 volumes translated now. So In the Shade of the Quran, Sayyid Qutb. Of course, Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Draz, his interpretation of Surah Al-Baqarah is translated in the English language by the name The Good News. Draz, D-R-A-Z, Qutb, Q-U-T-B. our Ustad and Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali, not al-Ghazali Abu Hamid, not the old one, the contemporary al-Ghazali, he has an interpretation of the Quran called Tafsir al-Mawdu'i, towards a thematic interpretation of the Quran. You will find it on the internet as well. So look for contemporary interpretations of the Quran, because they give you a lot of knowledge that revolves around that book and what it's about. And I think this is very important. And a number of these books are now translated in the English language.
Besides your book on Maqasid al-Sharia, which others would you recommend on that subject?
Well, on Maqasid al-Sharia, I recommend Sheikh Tahir ibn Ashur, Ashur, and he has a good book on Maqasid al-Sharia. Recommend Sheikh Taha al-Alwani, Alwani, our Sheikh and our Ustad, and he has a number of books in the English language on Maqasid al-Sharia. And your brother, I have a number of books really on that. If you go on my website, you will find a number of books in a number of languages on Maqasid al-Sharia, or on issues taking a Maqasid perspective on them. So you will find that, and you will find references, more references to other Maqasid scholars.
Jazakallah khair, everyone. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Jasser. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Allah
we appreciate. This is not the first time that you would be with us, and inshallah, you shall be sharing your knowledge with us in 2 weeks on the 10th of May, 2020. It will be a continuation on the subject today. May Allah reward you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. Forgive you for whatever mistakes that you have made unintentionally, and may He bless this knowledge for us in this world and in the hereafter.
I see some questions on the chat box, I guess.
We'll address them in 2 weeks.
Inshallah, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
we'll address.
So, Jazakumullah khair. So, inshallah, in 2 weeks, there is a part 2 of this talk. And please, my brothers and my sister organizing this, if you can send me the questions from the chat, I will answer them, inshallah, next week, or answer them on the group. I think we have some group. Anyway, I will answer them, inshallah. And Jazakumullah khair. Next time, inshallah, we continue. For those who are asking about the website, it's my first name, last name in one word, .net. Google it, you will find it, inshallah. It's JasserAuda.net, and click on the language, and inshallah, there are resources there, inshallah.
Okay. Jazakallah khair once again. The topic next is the revival of the individual by Dr. Basma Abdul Ghaffar. We shall be expecting you by 5 p.m. Nigeria. The link will be shared out in due course, inshallah. Please stay safe, everyone. May Allah protect us all. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah.